Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible to you? Gokultheerthan, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello? Sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible. I'll just make you as a presenter. We'll start the program in another 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, can I just check that whether my PPT is it shareable? Can I do that now?
Yes, sir. You're a presenter now.
Okay, so switch to desktop.
Management and security operation. He has done security compliance and VAPT auditing and network and security consultation service for government entities. Also, he has delivered several information security education and awareness programs for government officers and education institutes. With this brief introduction, I just welcome Sir Gokultheerthan M for this session. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thanks for introduction. Actually, I would like to thank DIT for giving me this opportunity to at least, share my experience of whatever doing in maintenance and then the project we are handling. And so, because this is a 6 days long session, I understand you might have learned many areas of networking securities. Here I just give you like a concluding remarks kind of thing where you can take away. So this will be like the takeaways for the best.
Okay.
Am I audible, sir? Hello?
Okay.
Am I audible? Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So my presentation would be like that. So it would be like takeaway kind of instructions. So I'll start my presentation. So I hope that my slides are visible. So if not, please let me know. Okay, so we'll discuss about best network security practices. Okay, so it's always like the three pillars of security requirement. So which we need to understand. So right, so that is a very fundamental requirement of any security. If you talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? So we all very well aware of that. Okay, so basically to make sure that our network is confidential, right? So we need to use tools like IPsec, SSL, TLS, and VPN sort of things. So this is just to, in a nutshell, to if you understand, what are the, in a root level, how you can, make your network confidential. And then if you want to make your data or the data network is integrity, so you need to ensure that hashing functions which you use it ensure that the data are clean. Okay, and the very important part of the network. So when it comes to network, the major challenges where we face is the availability, right? So how do we ensure that availability of a network, right? If you're a network administrator or if you're a IT manager, right? So how will you handle such things, especially when you have problems like DOS or any kind of natural failures or anything like that, right? So how do you make our network robust and then fail safe, and also rigid against the DDoS kind of protection attacks? Okay. So this is a simple outline. So just to brief you, at what are the things we're going to cover. So we'll just simply see that what are the common attacks and how do we take a countermeasures. Okay, and then the importance of security policy and framework, right? And then what is the secure network architecture? Suppose if you design a networks, right, how can you make it secure, right? So the design itself, if it's a secure, so then it gives us a lot of confidence, and then it protects in a very wider aspect. Okay, And then we'll see the best practices of a network device or security device. So which, because network is such a complex thing where we use various types of devices, and then it is the nature of behavior itself different. So different devices have different kind of best practices. So we'll see that. And then it's very really important to have periodic security check, right? So whether our network is secure, right? So we need to have how we can ensure that is by monitoring and auditing and things like that. And how will you handle the incidents, any security incident or any failures or anything such that? So what are the measures we take to ensure that things are in right place, right? And then finally we'll see it's not all that, and we need to have a proper people are trying to aware of all this aspect, right? It's not only the device. Finally, the people are going to interact and work with the system, so people should aware of what are the security countermeasures, things like that. So first we'll see what are the common security attacks you might be aware of. This just I wanted to give a glimpse of it. The first thing is attack or whatever it is try to penetrate into a network, right? So these are the major issues normally. So that's where we use firewalls, and we have proper secure network designs, and then exploiting software bugs, buffer overflow, and any flaws in the system. So we have to use IDS IPS kind of things to protect against it. And denial of service, so this is one of the challenging aspect. You cannot do anything on the design aspect because it is really difficult, but how do you ensure that, how do you protect against this kind of attack? And then these TCP hijacking, so how the things get ended in the man in the middle attack kind of thing. So how do you ensure those things are fixed by using IPsec kind of protocols, encryption kind of protocols, and especially packet sniffing. So how do you ensure that the data transfer on your network, it is not sniffed by someone, right? So especially we need to use encryption wherever it's possible, especially when you have critical data are transferred in the network, right? And then social problems like people the lack of awareness, lack of knowledge on the security aspect, so which will lead into disaster, right? So these are the things which awareness program and things like that, trainings can actually fix it. So first thing, any organization, if you take it, it's very really important to have a security policy, right? Because security policy requirement might change, depends on the organization. So we need to define what is the set of resources or the assets what we have. So we need to design the policy accordingly to ensure that the security countermeasures are taken place, right? So because in a common man, if you're a network administrator, for him it will be really difficult to understand what to take care, what to not take care. So the management has to come up with a proper policy saying that what is allowed, what is not allowed, how it's allowed, all those things. So these are some short list of policy. It is not only the things. So I just want to give some examples here. So I just put it like access control policy, BOID. So bring your own device. If your companies having that BOID option, so you need to have a proper policy. Otherwise, it will become a disaster because devices people are carrying everywhere, and then it could have possible infections. So how do you ensure that that infection does not come into your corporate network, right? So that's a policy should have design. And asset management policy, how do you manage your asset? What is the kind of asset you have, right? So how will you ensure that all the assets are secured against the threats, right? And risk management policy, how will you manage your risk? Because the entire assets what you have, it does not have the same risk of each and every device. So you need to assess the risk, and based on that you have to manage it. So you should have a policy saying that which are the assets are highly risky, which are the assets are highly valuable, and things like that. and encryption policy wherever you require encryption, wherever you don't require encryption. For example, sometimes you have an material, published materials which may not be required encryption because it is available to everyone. So things like that. So you need to classify that. This all thing can be put into a policy. And then password policy, it's very, very important. Password is for every application we have password. So if you don't have password policy, and if you don't enforce into your devices, so it's not only having the policy, you need to enforce in all the devices. So that also comes into a policy saying that the device should not allow to take any weak password, things like that. So these are some of the policy which we need to define it properly. Without policy, managing a security, would not be an easy task. Okay. And then you should have a security framework. It's not only the policy is sufficient, right? So policies are fine. Okay. So we define set of rules saying that yes, this is allowed, don'ts, like that's fine. But how will you put it into a process, right? So it's really important to know the functions, the major functions of an security framework. So this is the what you're saying is a NIST cybersecurity framework. Actually, it's a freely available framework. Design is there. So this is very widely used and very matured kind of framework. So which you can easily follow that, and which will help you to improve your security landscape. So when you see identity, where we define what are the assets we have, what are the our policies and the risk management and governance, things like that. So we need to define what are the things we have it in our network or infrastructures, right? So which are the things has to cover by the framework. So that's what we are defining. And once you define, we need to ensure that the things are protected, right? Making access control mechanism and awareness program training, security, maintenance, how you maintain, how do you protect it, what are the security measures you have to take it to prevent any kind of attacks or things like that. So it's not only that, the way when you protect it, it's not that 100% protect. So any security, any protection does not give you 100% security. So always you have to keep watching on it, right? So whatever the protect mechanism is actually adequate enough, or is there anything happens, any loopholes, any weakness, vulnerabilities. So those things you need to keep monitoring it. You need to detect that. So that's called detects. So you detect anomalies or any events or things like that. So once you detect any of those flaws in your network, right? So what you have to do immediately is respond to it. How can you respond? You have to first of all communicate and analyze, and then you have to see what are the things you can fix it to, improve that things, and then make it resilient, right? And then not only that, once you learn this all the things that happened, right? How do you ensure that it doesn't happen in future? So that's where recover comes into picture, right? So you need to have a plan of recovery. So it's not only fixing the problem is first step, and then recovering. So from there might be some loss of data, loss of things, right? Or you can actually improve your framework itself, or you can implement additional controls into the policy and things like that. So this is very brief about security frameworks. You can just have a look of framework if you want to design. So you can have a consultants to study your networks, and then framework can be designed accordingly. Okay, that's very one of the important aspect, because when you don't have proper definition, defined policy, and you don't have the framework, it's really difficult to make things secure. So if you're depend on one or two people, so right, so it might be the security things is highly depend on 2-3 persons, right? But in an organization, we should have an system. When you have a system, means you should have policy, you should have framework. The system is secure now, so any people can follow the system, and periodically you can have assess your security systems and things like that. So let's see, when it comes to network, so it is highly important to have a secure network architecture, right? It's the basic requirement of any secure network, right? If your network architecture is not proper, so then whatever you things you follow, it will not be correct, or it might not work properly. So let's see how you can design your network architecture. It should be in a secure way. So first, try to just an simple understanding of domains. So when you talk about domains, you might be aware of it. I'll just give you a brief introduction to it. Okay, so when you talk about domain, there are three kinds of domain: collision domain, broadcast domain, and then the network domain, right? So the collision domains nowadays, anyway, it's not there. So we don't see hubs using in anywhere in today's world, but still, we use things like splitters and things like that. So this creates data loss in the network. Collision can happen, right? So that is called collision domain. So that means the data which is transferred on the network is lost in the transit, right? And then something called broadcast domain. So what is called broadcast domain in a network? The informations are shared in the network in a broadcast in nature. So where you might have seen the attacks like man in the middle attack. So that can happen possibly in the broadcast domain. So where broadcast domain, the people or the networks or the systems, they identify themselves by doing a broadcast, right? So the man in the middle text, so attacker comes into the network, he tried to spoof that is the other IP address and things like that. So that is one problem. Another problem is when you have the network in the broadcast nature, so there is a lot of unnecessary packets exchanged, and that could lead into a performance degradation, right? So that's a simple introduction about traffic domains. And as nowadays anyway, hubs are not there, so we ensure that there is no splitters are used, any no bus technologies are used. And when it comes to broadcast domain, we need to ensure that the network is not more than 250 number of system. So that's the ideal number. But you can have it more, but you need to have little extra precautions, right? Because I said the broadcast domain, the number of host is more, the number of broadcast is more. So there could be a possible weakness in the network, right? So that we should can be avoided. Like even if you use IP address, use static and DHCP, there could be IP collision problems, multiple DHCP problems, DHCP root DHCP issues, all those things might possibly will have that. Okay, this is an example of bad network architecture. So when you are design a network, so you are not supposed to design like this. Okay, so it could be a single point of failure. So if you see the switch in the middle, it is a device which it connects every other device. So that could be a possibility of single point of failure, right? And it's all in a single broadcast domain, as I told you. So it's not recommended to have one single broadcast domain and single security domain, and there is no backup links or device available. So single point of failure, right? So these are the some of the issues with this kind of architecture, and we try to eliminate or we need to ensure that the connection between elements or minimal path, right? So that should be ensured. It's not a linear kind of connection, it's not recommended. So you should have always have a tree kind of a structure where the devices are close to each other. And even if you follow the tree kind of a structure, you need to ensure that you don't do a daisy chain, like from the branches you should not go to the root, right? So when you do that, you're mixing actually the different levels, right? So that's not recommended. Okay, so if you see the ideal network design, if you say simple design, it would be something like this. So when you have network border where you connect your internet and ISP, things like that, and we have a core network where all the networks of your organization come to a one place where you can interconnect all the subdivisions of your network. So that's called the core network. And then where we call distribution layer. So distribution layer is like it connects multiple access layers of switches, right? And finally we have access layer switches where all the end devices are connected. So this is called access layer. So this is the simple or the ideal way of designing network, and it's not only sufficient. We should always think about redundant in the sense you need to have failovers, right? So this is a WAN scenario. In a WAN network, how we can have a redundant and failover things, right? So if you can see here, so we have two ISPs. So normally, one ISP is not sufficient because your entire business or anything is totally depends on that ISP, right? So it's a availability problem. So you need to have high availability by ensuring that you have connection from more than one ISP, and also you need to ensure their physical path is different direction. For example, if you take one ISP, another ISP, but they might be using the common fiber or common route, in fact, actually. So then what would be a problem is in cities like Bangalore, so frequent works carried out, and then fiber cut can happen. So even though if you have two ISP providers, so finally you will lag into an issue. So you need to ensure when you have two ISP, they are into different path, and the physical fiber is actually different, right? And then when it comes to doing your for example, if you have a hosted servers which are accessed by public users, right, what you can do is you can have BGP protocols running on the WAN side. Ensure that your IPs are routed through this ISP. In case if suppose this ISP goes down, to ensure that the same IP address are reachable through the another ISP. So that is where you require help of BGP protocol, right? You can just take more on that and try to understand how it is possible to design. It's very much possible, so that your business is always there. And then internally, you can have redundant in every layer, like routers, switches, firewall. So maybe you can have cluster kind of configuration, high availability, active kind of thing. So there's one device, when there is both devices are active, it will work in a full capacity. At least if one device fails, even though your performance degraded, but your service is not completely affected, right? So this is the kind of design which you can have it in the WAN side, so that your network is always secure. So high availability will be there, right? And it's not only that, and you should have the same redundancy. You need to bring it into the access layer also. So this would be the best network design architecture, where you have redundant ISP at the border level, and then you have in core level also you have firewalls in HA mode, or active kind of, or even active passive also would be okay. But when you do active passive, you're actually wasting the resource of another firewall, right? So if you have active, so it can be a load balancing also. That will be always. So always when you have a redundant design, it's better to have it in a load sharing manner, so that you can completely utilize the resources, and it would give you the benefits of it, right? And then in the distribution layer, you have again redundant in every possible layer. So that's how you can design the best network design. And then design is aspect of availability, right? So ensure the availability, how you can design redundant and things like that. So that's what we saw now. So now we'll see security point of view. So how it is secure, how can you secure the network design, what you have, how it can be secured, right? So the zoning is one of the important concept. So it's not that you have a single network in an organization, where it would be an issue that one place, if it's get affected, so it could easily spread into another place, and once entire network is spreads, it is very, very difficult to control, right, and identify also. And it's very difficult to isolate if anything happens. So zoning is like you can create micro networks, micro segmentation. Normally we call it micro segmentation. That means you have to divide the network into small segment. How many segment as possible, you can create so many segments, and any traffic is exchanged between the segment, it always has to be screened and restricted. So who has to access what, and what are the access permissions, right? So these are the things which makes the entire network is highly secure. Okay, so here we saw this diagram shows you very simple representation of zoning. Any organization at least should have these two zones, right? It's not many of the organizations are, especially in education institutes, so they might not be following that kind of thing. So where it is very simple one flat network, right? So where server, desktop, everything in one network, that would always lead into a disaster, right? So we have always internet which connected through firewall, and at least the firewall actually segregates two different network. One is called DMZ. DMZ is nothing but demilitarized zone, right? So that means it is an untrusted zone. Untrusted zone. Why we are putting untrusted zone? Because these are the servers mainly accessed by the internet users, right? So that means this servers, whatever is here, are highly possible, that high possibility of infections, right? So we need to ensure that that infection does not spread into our LAN or any secure network, right? This is one simple example. And if you can see further how you can do, it's not only network segmentation, and also it's called defense in depth. So defense in depth in the sense you should have a layered approach, right? It's not one layer. You should have many layers of firewalls before it get into a restricted zone, right? You can see the outer layers internet zone, and then you have external DMZ, which is especially meant for public hosted servers. So these are the servers which is exposed to internet, where people try to get access to it, like web server or anything such that. And then we have enterprise zones, or external zones. So these are another layer. So even if you can see that in every layer we have a firewall, right? And then the firewall has restrictions that who can access it, has a policy saying that who has to access what, right? And then we have internal DMZs. So internal DMZ is like intranet, where people can access only within an organization. It's not permitted the internal external user are coming and accessing it, right? And then we have restricted zone. So where we have all the systems are highly secured systems, we put it in the restricted zone. So where no one is allowed unless very much required access to that kind of zone, right? So this is another the segmenting of network. So micro segmenting. So it's not just segmenting. As far as possible, we need to create micro segments. So in an institute, if you have multiple departments, so it's possibly what you can do is you can have different LAN for different departments, right? So at least if it's one place affects, it does not spread to other place. Like how we do COVID quarantines and isolations, right? So when one person get infected, so we try to isolate the primary contacts of all people, right? So similar approach we have to follow it here also, to ensure that the one, as soon as the one system is get infected, it does not spread to entire organization, right? So that's the idea here, having the micro segmentation. Okay, so this is about network design. So by having the design network itself, it actually resilience enough some of the security. At least we safeguard the remaining. Suppose let's say there is a security incident or attack happened. So we actually, by simple network design, we are safeguarding 80% of the attacks, right? So that kind of very simple mechanism, right? So now let's see the network security devices. When it comes to network, we need to secure it, right? How do we secure it? So we have some set of devices. So let's see what are the devices which can use it to secure, and what are the aspects, right? So first of all, it's firewall, and firewall is like a packet filtering device. Application firewall is like the firewall which is designed for filtering any application level protocols, right? Firewall just blocks the packets based on the header, whereas application can do much more than that. So that's called application firewall. Or you might have heard WAF, web application firewall. So this is also kind of application firewall. And network access control, right? How you can ensure that any new device or any unsecured devices come into network, how you can easily isolate and then screen that security measures of a device. So that's where we do network access control system, right? And then we use proxy servers. So you might have heard proxy servers. And we need to use VPN as far as possible when you use external communication, right? So rather using internet things, it's always better to have a VPN so that our traffic is encrypted and it does not seen by any intruders. And then let's see what are the IDS and IPS, what are the best practices which it can follow, and what are the things it can do, right? And protocol analyzer. So we need to analyze the protocols of network, and we need to have the complete map of the traffic generated in the network, which will help us to identify any anomalies or any security events. Okay. And content filtering or URL filtering. So should have a filtering of URL itself, because we need to follow layer wise. First we have firewall, which filters based on the header, and then we come to control of packets or the headers, right? So you just filter based on its file type or based on the URL, and then you come to application layer. So we have to have proxy. So these are the things you can have it in sequentially, so that the filtering happens very smooth and hierarchically. Okay. And then DOS is the one of the unavoidable threat. You whatever you do, still there is a possibility that DOS kind of attacks will be there. So how do you prevent, and what are the measures you need to take? And then finally, we know that there's a device called UTM and next generation firewall, which actually does all the things what we discussed, right? It's in a one box solution, right? All the solution given in a one box. That is most popular devices. So we'll see how we can use that. So when it comes to firewall, so what are the best practices that we need to follow, right? So first thing, you need to ensure the availability, because firewall is the one of the critical component of any network, right? So if the firewall fails, it would be the entire network is down, right? So we need to try to have a HA kind of setup. So cluster mode possible, like it's activated, so that you have the load sharing things are happening. And block unused IPs. So whether it could be when it's the traffic comes from internet, we need to ensure that there is not necessary packets are coming into network. So it should only the packet which should come, the IP address which is belong to us. So that is the first thing you need to do, so that your 90% of the unwanted traffics are filtered there itself. So right, so that's how you have to do it layer wise. And allow only required policies and followed by explicit deny. So this is also very important. Many of the places we saw, when you're doing auditing, we have seen a lot of places, people fail to do this kind of thing, because it's a very simple thing, and it is a very if you don't follow this simple thing, it could be a disaster. For example, you don't put explicit deny, so you put what are the packets should be filtered, and then by mistake, if you don't do this deny thing, so other packets also can easily pass through. So that's where it's very really important. And always when I see people, when you use it, if you try to any application or something like that, if they doesn't work, the first thing what they do is disable the firewall. So that is also the very, very bad practice. So, okay, for a moment is fine to understand whether it's an issue with firewall or not. For a momentary, it is fine. But so momentary, once you understand the firewall is blocking, then you need to configure it, right? You need to understand. You can use packet snipping tools like Wireshark, right? And then you need to see which are the ports are utilizing. So you need to open those ports again, put back the firewalls. Or if the firewall is not causing any issue, you can immediately put back, right? So I would recommend even Windows systems. I saw people disable firewall, and then so host firewall should be always enforced, and network firewall also should be enforced with explicit deny. So we should allow what are the packets should be allowed, and then you restrict with explicit deny. Periodic check of firewall policies. So you need to, it's not only that, and then I said the by mistake someone can configure some rules which is actually becomes the loophole. So it try to penetrate all the traffics. We have seen that in many places. So you need to ensure that you don't have regular, maybe 3 months and once, so people can log in and see the what are the policies. And some devices actually have the hit counts also. So when you have a policy, each policy it will show this many number of hit count, 1,000 or 10, or so numbers will be there. So based on the number, you can see which is the most number of counts it has been screened. So you can, based on that, you can do something called reorganize the order of firewall policy. So when you have the firewall policy, there might be hundreds of rules or even thousands of rules will be there, right? So it is highly beneficial if you reorder the policy. It can increase your performance. For example, the rule number one has hit count of only one, and the hit count of one, and let's say rule number 100 has hit count of million. So that means, so million times the firewall has read hundreds of rules, because the rules read by top to bottom. So the 1 million packets are read 100 number of rules. So it is 1 million into 100. So that is the time the firewall is processing. So what you can do is, and also the hierarchy is very important. Apart from hierarchy, if there's rules are always flat, then what you can do, you can just bring it into first place. So you are making the firewall 100 times faster, right? Just replacing the rule from number 100 to 1, right? So that it has to be highly designed and highly understood. So it's not just like that, you cannot put it. So that is required highly skill to understand that kind of reordering. So that is also would help us in performance. And then firewall, you can do traffic shaping and load balancing, right? Traffic shaping in the sense you can actually design, it is also one of the important key aspect for denial of service, right? So you can actually restrict traffic for a particular given system, so that even though some person is try to attack, this would not happen. Or even the class of service, the people who are using the particular amount of bandwidth also can be streamlined. So these are some of the aspect. And then geolocation blocking. So let's say if you have an web server which is meant only for Indian users, so you don't need to allow it to rest of the world, right? You can have a geolocation blocking, so that my web server only should be used by Indian origin, right? So those kind of geolocation blocking, if you do, so at least you have the 80% of threats are eliminated, because the major threats could come from China or Pakistan. So if you do geo blocking, so especially, at least if you don't block the rest of the world, you can block it wherever you could possibly get the threat from. So that it will give some amount of benefit. And external VPN proxy blocking. So for example, let's say when it comes to geo blocking, so if you're if you try to penetrate, so if you're blocked, let's say China or Pakistan geolocations, right? So what they can use different VPNs, or the persons inside your LAN, they try to access other countries VPN. So this is also one of the useful. So you can block wherever the VPNs are there. So traffic coming through the VPN, you can easily block it. So to avoid that, diluting the geolock mechanism. And then log retention policy. So because every government and every organization have a different requirement of policy for log retention. Some says required to store for 2 years, some required to store for 3 years. So you need to have a proper policy saying that my log should be retained for so many periods, because it would be later on required if suppose any incident happens. So because always that the investigation will happen after 3 months or 6 months. So that time, if they ask for the log, you should have the logs stored in your servers. So that is very, very highly important. And application filters, like the firewall, which has a capability to understand the protocols like HTTP, HTTPS, or any APIs and things like that, right? And it's not a replacement for any network firewall. It's purely designed for application point of view. So especially the application firewall can have the SSL offload also. So because if you see that traffic nowadays, most of the traffic comes from HTTPS, right? So that means the whatever the data comes inside the HTTPS is all encrypted, right? So the firewall can't do much about it. Even though if you put application aware firewalls, the firewalls cannot see what is there inside, because it is end-to-end encrypted. So that's where you can use application level firewalls, the apps, right? So WAPs has a feature of SSL offload. So that means your SSL can be open in the WAP, and then you can see through all the data of the HTTP protocol, so that you can see what are the threats and what are the any kind of attacks, so it can easily understand and then filter it. So that's where you require application layer protocols when firewalls. You can see some simple example here. So if you have an internet, first thing you should the packet filtering device like UTM device, which does all filtering like packet filtering and then denial of service kind of filtering and then all those things, right? But it cannot do any filtering on the application side, right? Whether it's SQL injection or any other kind of attacks, this cannot easily understand because the traffic is encrypted, right? So that's the reason you have the web application firewall, so database or web applications, right? Which could actually see through all the data, all the protocols, and what are the vulnerable APIs or things like that. It could easily filter those things. So this would be an a safe design of a network. And then we have network access control. So network access control is like eliminates computer before allowing into the connecting to the network. For example, let's say like BYD kind of things, where the user brings a device into a network, right? So you need to understand whether that device is completely secure to connect into my network, right? So that's where for example, it would be whether the patches, Windows patches have been done, antivirus is installed, or any firewall policies are enforced, right? So you need to ensure that what are the checks it has to ensure before connecting to the network, right? So that's where the NAC comes into picture. So that how does it works is like it will have a quarantined LAN in a network, right? So there's a segregated network. It's like we discussed about micro segment. So this is one of the segment where you should create a VLAN for quarantine network. So as soon as people get in, it could be in wireless or wired network. So the people connect into quarantine network where they would get access to internet and try to perform the checks of the requirement of organization, right? The NAC device would tell you these things has to be up to date. So based on that, if once you fix that, the NAC device will see through all your settings, and if it's found to be clean, so then it will take you into the normal network. So this is called network access control system. And proxy server, you all might aware of it, but the benefit what we get from proxy server is like we can actually block URL based filtering, or you can forbid any kind of servers. And other important aspect is like you can save the bandwidth, because for example, if you download some ISO image, right? So somebody might have been already downloaded. So suppose the other person try to download the same image, it won't actually go to the internet. Instead, it will directly take it from the proxy server. It will have some kind of local buffer. So from the buffer, it can copy. So from that, you can save a lot of bandwidths, right? And then you have something called reverse proxy, which is like load balancer. So it could be something like web application firewall. So web application firewall actually does the filtering, but here it does not do any filtering, but it just do the load balancing. So for example, let's say when you have an high-end applications which is supposed to use by thousands or billions of users, right? You can't put it in a single server. So you need to have web server 1, 2, 3. The load has to be balanced very efficiently, right? So that's where we use reverse proxy or load balancer. There's a concept to use it to ensure that high availability. Suppose out of 3 servers, if one server is failed, still your services are there. So that's the benefit of load balancer. And we use VPNs, right? So always, whenever you're out of the office network, rather using public IP accessing into a server, and then this will always lead into a security issues, right? So rather, what you could use VPN. So you should have a VPN gateway set up in your organization, and people can directly connect to the VPN, and then they get the entire access of a network. And then it's also you can have network access control policy also can be enforced on the VPN devices, right? So as soon as the remote, like nowadays it's all quite common that work from home. So somebody is working from home, so as soon as you connect into the corporate VPN network, you need to ensure that his devices are secured in terms of corporate or the company's security requirement. So that's where we use quarantine policy for VPN. And also it's very obvious to ensure that the VPN what we're using is highly encrypted. So otherwise someone could easily see through all the traffic which are your highly sensitive traffic which are sending to the internet, right? And then the multi-factor authentication, right? So because the VPN is one of the very critical crucial component of entry to the network. So if someone compromises username password, right, so someone can easily come into the network. So that's why we required multi-factor authentication, maybe through mobile or through email. There should be an additional level of authentication should be there. So that would be an additional security. And not only that, you should have user-based and role-based access, right? If suppose some particular person is supposed to work on the HR management role-based things, so you should only get access to the HR servers. It should not get access to the rest of the entire network. So that is also one of the important aspect which you need to check through when using VPNs. And you all very well aware about IPS and IDS. So what are the things you can do? So especially when you talk about IDS, there are two kinds of detection. One is anomaly, another one is misuse. That means malicious detections, right? And when it comes to IDS and IPS, you have host-based IDS as well as network-based IDS, right? Or you can have hybrid method of IDS. So it just really ensure that what is the kind of requirement that your organization demands. So accordingly, you need to design that. Okay. So especially when you're using IDS, so signature is most important. It's not only IDS. When you use antivirus, anti-spam, so any kind of signature-based attacks, right? So which is all required regular updates. Why regular update? Because to ensure that any new attacks, new kind of trend attacks coming into the network, we need to ensure that we do have the signature for that to identify that. And then when it comes to IDS and IPS, it is very common that we will come under false positive. So false positive in the sense like, it would not be an actually attack. It would be a normal traffic, but the IDS and IPS would treat as a attacks. For example, signature. So what is the signature? Normally we'll say, suppose let's say there is 5 number of SSH connection come into within a minute. So that could be a one signature. So someone is trying to do some multiple sessions at the same time. It also will falls under that kind of signature. So that's immediately it would block it, right? So we should have a policy saying that once it is blocked, so how long it has to keep blocking. So 10 minutes, 20 minutes, that particular IP will be blocked. So we need to ensure how long it has to block. So after that, it will unblock again. Or so permanently you unblock it for a particular given IP address. So these are some policies who are the people are allowed to have permanent whitelisting. And these are some policies which need to be derived, and accordingly we need to handle the false positives. So when it comes to IDS and IPS, false positives are quite common, and you should know how to behave that. So sometimes I see the bad practice, what they do is they completely disable that signature. So that is not recommended actually. Because that signature is designed for some kind of attack. So when you design completely disable it, it would actually tomorrow some actual attack happen, then IDS IPS will not be in a position to block that. So I would not recommend you to completely disable that signature. Rather, you customize it. You customize it for a particular given source of address. Suppose let's say you are an IT manager and your system should be completely whitelisted. You can do that. Okay. And then enable in IPS mode. So because most of the device comes in the option whether you want to run it in IPS mode or IDS mode. So IDS is only will be detecting and intimate you. So that would take a lot of time. So by then you react into it, you just see that incident, the entire incident would have been over, right? So it's better to have it in IPS mode. So I understand there will be always false positive, but we need to handle this in a better way. Okay, so and then we should have host-based IDS and IPS agents. It's not only the network IDS is sufficient. You should have agents installed in host-based, at least in a critical servers or things like that. So where sometimes the patterns and things like that will be different. So the ideas cannot you see through all the things. For example, encrypted traffics, right? So encrypted traffics, ideas cannot actually see through encrypted traffics. So in that case, host agent can help integrating with the IPS ideas, network ideas by hybrid model. So the host ideas will give the information to the network ideas, IPS, and network ideas based on the information given by the host ideas, it can actually block the traffics. So these are the things which you can handle using IDS IPS. And protocol analyzer, which will help you to see any anomalies in the network. So any unusual behavior happen in the network, you can daily look at the traffic graphs and see whether the traffic is usual or unusual, right? Examine well-known patterns. So you might have, so the patterns graph is like, daytime is high and then nighttime is low, and suddenly you see that there is a spike traffic in the night, right? So we need to ensure whether it's an genuine traffic or any other traffic. So these are the things will help you to understand the anomalies. And then you can have protocol analyzers tools also to use it to understand more on protocols or patterns in the network to understand is there any flaws or any problems with the network. And internet content filtering, so it's very obvious. So if you want, it's also kind of a firewall policy. It is one level above, saying that you can filter based on the URL, not only with IP address and port number. Now you can know what is the exact URL to be blocked. So if Facebook wants to be blocked, you can block it, right? So that kind of block. Or you want to filter based on the files. Let's say I want to filter all the video files. I don't want to allow my user to download the videos, right? Or torrents. So if you don't want to use any torrents kind of applications, so you can block the torrents kind of applications, right? And then when it comes to DOS, so these are three kinds of majorly, like sync flood, smurf attack, and then distributed denial. So distributed means actually the attacks are not originated from one system. It might be originated from bots, especially you aware of a bot, right? So there are hundreds of systems attacking one particular system to make it down, right? So what are the things you can do is reducing the attack surface. So how do you reduce the attack surface? We discussed about segmentation, right? You need to see the visibility to the internet. So we should reduce the visibility of a server, right? If it's a port visible, only that port, and then you should have a layered approach like WAF, load balancer, WAF, and then servers. And then the attack should not go into all the servers. So that's how we can reduce the surface. So that means the surface is visible to the attacker is very less compared to actual surface. And then there's something called content delivery network. So it is not very simple solution, especially in cloud. So they have solution like content delivery. That content delivery, how it works is you might have seen YouTube. So it is just like that. So the actual content might be in servers, but the caching happens in every region of the network, right? So that means the actual request does not go to the actual server. It goes to only the caching servers. So if at all someone try to attack, it only affect the caching server, not the actual server. So this is one method you can avoid denial of service. And that's why you see the major websites like YouTube or any large services, they are not being affected by any kind of this kind of attacks. And limiting the number of so for us, simple thing what you can do it in our servers or API gateways or in firewalls or WAPs. We can design that DOS settings. You can actually limit the number of requests per IP. So let's say per IP per a minute only 5 connections are allowed, right? So that means a person try to attack from one system, he can only raise only 5 requests. So beyond that, he has to wait for another minute. So by doing that, you can actually avoid any kind of DOS kind of attack. And then you can use web application firewall. So that also does the same kind of thing, like application layer attacks, like HTTP attacks and things like that. And sizing of a bandwidth and redundancy. So it's not only that. So network level, if the bandwidths are choked, right? So always we need to plan having more bandwidth or redundant network, so that one network is completely choked, still we have the access to other network. So network level, if you want to avoid the denial of service, so this is the way you can do it, right? So these are some of the simple techniques where you can avoid DDoS kind of attacks. And then finally, we have a device called UTM and next generation firewall. So we've seen the number of devices which support, number of methods which supports or give you the security mechanisms. So this is the device which give the comprehensive solution in a one box. So for example, filtering you mean firewall. So filtering and logging, so entire logging of traffics, and then application awareness. So the firewall does no application level filtering, right? So what is the application? Suppose let's say someone, any firewall, if you see port 80 will be always open, right? So the people are trying to use the port 80 infiltrating or backdoor entries. They use the ports. And then firewall can easily understand whether it's HTTP traffic or something else. Based on that, it can block. Okay. And then gateway, it does the antivirus and anti-spam prevention on the network level itself. So normally we have a antivirus installed, anti-spam installed on a system, desktop or any endpoint device, but UTM device has this functionality in the gateway level itself. So when you try to download a file from the internet, it just checks that this file is a clean from virus, right? Or the mail which you try to send, or mail is coming into organization, so it checks whether this mail is having a spam or not. So these are the things which has also supported by UTM. And network intrusion, IDS and IPS also it supports, right? So it has to have signatures and all those things. So what normal IDS IPS can do, it also have these features. URL and control filtering we discussed, and then WLAN security. So this is also additional features which is provided by next generation firewalls. Like you can integrate your entire WLAN into the firewall or the UTM, so that all the traffic can be go through the firewall, and your wireless security is actually landing onto the firewall, so that it can be screened properly, the security checks, right? And then VPN termination also can be on the same device, right? So for example, let's say if your VPN is directly terminating onto the LAN, so the firewall in between cannot do anything, because it is a traffic is encrypted. Your VPN traffic is encrypted, which is going through a firewall, so firewall can't do much about it, right? So now you have the VPN directly terminating onto the UTM or firewall device, which actually has the visibility of what are the kind of traffic coming from the end device, which can easily filter it and then control it. And then I was just talking about access control mechanism for the VPN. So that can be easily done here in the firewall. So you have the VPN service here. The work from home person is landing onto the firewall, and then you have the filtering mechanism. So that particular person, based on this is profile, he has to access only this particular system. So you can use this filtering mechanism, so it can easily work that way. And then DOS mitigation also, it is available. So you can configure there for minute how many sessions has to be opened. So those configurations options will be available. So accordingly, you can configure it. And then reduce the compliance burdens, right? For when it comes to compliance, let's say you are in an organization, you should have this device, this functionality. So what all the functionality what we discussed, when you say in a company, so they will say most of the functionality should be there in place, right? So you can't put it in a separate device. When you make it, it will be very difficult to manage, and also compliance problems will come. So when you use this device, you don't have such issues. And okay, sorry. And then when you have this kind of, and then you should have continual automatic updates. So update with respect to your, your firmware, or it's update with your antivirus, anti-spam signatures, or your IDS, IPS signatures. Okay. Is there any message? I see some chat box message coming. Shall I continue, or you have anything to ask? Hello.
No, sir, you can continue, sir.
Okay. So fine. And there is, and also it provides data loss and data leak preventions. Suppose, let's say your company is demanding some kind of data loss and data leak preventions, right? So you can ensure that what are the data should not go out of the network, right? So which are the system especially. So you can configure it and ensure that there is no data leak or data loss from your network. Okay, so that's all about security devices. Now let's see the normal your network devices. How you can secure your network devices, like switches, routers, because we in network there are plenty of devices available, right? So this is actually this slides talk about the generic aspect of it, and then we'll go into further what are the best practices for switches, routers separately. So this actually the superset of it can even applicable to firewall or any kind of device, right? So first thing foremost important is to ensure that you have the secure physical access. So maybe you put it in a server room, you have a biometric access control or any such thing, right? So that's the most important layer one security. And then you should have restricted access. So restricted access means like getting access through SSH terminal or web terminal, or trying to management console, right? So we should have an access control system and role based access, right? So even though we have access control system, and then which user has to have which are the access. There is a normal user and there is a privileged user. So who is the privileged user and who has what are the access? So we need to define it properly, right? And then inactive session timeout. So even if someone is getting logged into device, we need to ensure that sometimes they leave it unattended, right? So we need to ensure that beyond certain period it should automatically log out. So that we should enable it. And then password policy implemented and enforced, right? And also should block the failed login attempt. Suppose a person tried to log in 3 or 4 times, so you should actually lock those accounts. Okay. And then this password policy, it's not only in the policy defined saying that you should have a complex password and these are the things you should follow. It is not only that is sufficient. So the device should configure to it. So for example, if any password is given, weak password is given, it should not accept it, right? So that's the real importance, so that the user, when they change their password, it can be ensured that the password is not weak. Okay. And centralized log server. So logs are very critical when it comes to forensic or any investigating any events, right? So we should have a log stored in a central servers, because if you store it in local device, it could if it's crashed, that the hardware itself crashed, so then you will not have a log at all, right? Or someone can easily log in there and tamper the log also, right? Change the log. Someone goes there and change something, and yes, can change the log also, right? So it's better to have the log in a central place where it's completely secured and no modification is possible, right? And then all the devices should have synchronized with central NTP servers, right? So why it is very critical? Because when you capture the log from one device to another device, so for example, tomorrow we could get a notification from certain saying that there is the incident happened in your organization, so we would like to see the logs, right? Or give us the report. So then what you have to do is you have to go through multiple devices like firewall or IDS or switch routers or your application servers, right? So then when you take the log for a particular period, right? So if all the devices are in sync with time, so you can actually find out the correlation of the attack, right? If you don't have NTP synchronized, it will be really difficult to arrive at things. Okay. And default configuration, so you need to change all the default configuration. For example, username, password, any whatever when a device comes from a factory, it will always come with some default settings. So it is first thing you need to do is change all those things and secure the device. Okay, and disable unnecessary service like telnet, http, or any other snmp. If you're not, whatever the services which you are not using it, it's always better to disable. Okay, and use the encrypted protocols only. So if you want to take a session, you need to use SSH, or if you want to have web terminal, it's better to use HTTPS, or if you want to have monitoring or NMS kind of thing for managing your device, it's recommended to use SNMP version 3. Okay, so all communications are authenticated as encrypted. It should be encrypted, whether it's a route updates or flow tables or access to the router. So everything should be encrypted to ensure that no one in between captures our critical information, especially like username, password, right? So these are the things. And then obviously you should have update of security patches. So because the network device, any device always will have, after some time it'll undergo some kind of weakness, or some kind of flaws will be there. So that will be identified. Once it is identified, the security patches will be released by OEM. So we need to ensure that it is patched up in all our devices. And periodic configuration backup. So when you have a devices, we always configure things like based on our policy, we'll configure access lists and mechanism password policy, and then we configure all the settings, right? So which need to be backed up. Suppose tomorrow the device is crashed. So when you replace with a new device, so you can easily restore the backup. Right? If you don't have the backup, always it's, if you reconfigure it, you might not configure it properly, and then you to take the more time to bring back the system up. Okay, and when it comes to best practice for the switch, right? You should have a dedicated management VLAN. So management VLAN in the sense, when you try to log into the switch, right? You don't log into the normal ports. You should have a dedicated port, whereas no one can actually get that access for that. Okay, and limited access to SSH console, especially layer 3 ACLs. So you should have a ACL saying that from which system the SSH is allowed. So that is another level of restriction. And then you need to ensure that trunk ports. So when you call about trunk ports, the interface which carries all the VLAN traffic in a one single interface, right? So normally in industry, I've seen people are configuring trunk for all the VLANs. So that is a very bad practice. We need to restrict which are the VLANs we are using in our organization only to be allowed. And do not store the password in plain text, and config NTP and backup configuration, and keep hierarchical configuration. So like version control. So when you configure today one version, so tomorrow next, and then you should have the version controls. SNMPv3, and then upgrade the firmware, and then this last 3 points are very crucial to the switch, especially. Enable the same spanning tree protocol occurs all interconnect. So if you see in the starting, we have shown the secure network where we have the redundant and things like that. When you have a redundant architecture in a layer 2 network, you could possibly create a loop, right? So how do you avoid a loop is by using that spanning tree protocol. So you need to ensure that when you have a layer 2 network, you have the spanning tree protocols running on all the switches, which ensures that there's no loop happening. So when there is a loop, the network cannot work. Okay, and then this is another very important when it comes to if you're using DHCP in your network, right? Static IP using is fine, but static IPs also have its own problems, like duplicate IPs and things like that. So RA is nothing but route advertisement. When you especially use IPv6 packets, IPv6 IP address, so this is equivalent of DHCP, where you get your IP assigned by a router, right? So how your IPs are assigned based on the DHCP and RA servers, right? So that servers give you some information, based on that you configure IP address. So just to think of, there is a root device in the network, which also, because it happens in broadcast domain, right? So anyone can give you the information. So in a switch, you have to filter you have to configure a trusted port. So where your DHCP and RA is connected to a particular port, you need to configure that as a trusted port for DHCP and RA, route advertisement, so that your network switches filters the remaining all other ports, any traffics of DHCP offering, and then route advertisement, so that any person by mistake, if you configure something also, it could not affect the network. And configure port security based on the organization policy. So if you say that every person in the network should be accessed based on the MAC address, or the person should not move your system from one place to another place, right? So these are some requirements, if organization requirements. So we need to define the port security, right? So port security is nothing but who can connect to which port of the particular switch. So that's what it's all about. And when it comes to router, router is a layer 3 device. So we see what are the things we have to do, especially when it comes to router facing to the internet. So we should have configured firewalls like ACLs. So that means in initial I talk about the packets which are coming from the internet. It should only to our IP address. Sometimes what happens, even though packets coming with spoofed IP address. So we need to block all those things at the router level itself. Always encrypt the sensitive network traffic. So when you see there is a network which are highly sensitive traffic, so you should be encrypting with IPsec and things like that. Route updates must be restricted by ACLs. So whenever the routers are exchanging the route information, so it should always ACLs restricted. So which are the IPs only I should get announcement. For example, sometimes route poisoning can happen. So the device can send some unclassified IP address as a route, so that entire network can collapse. Or the route protocols communicate between each other by password protected. So these are the things which can be configured on a router when you configure dynamic routing protocols, right? And then you have to have event logging, like port status. So what is when the port is went down and up and things like that. And route changes, whenever the route changes in the router, it should also get logged. And configuration changes, if someone logs into there and try to change some configuration, so all those things event should be recorded. And disable unused interface. When it comes to router, it's normally it is static. We don't go on and off like a switch. So we need to always disable the ports which are not used, so that someone by mistake or something try to connect, and it should not create any problem. Ensure that download image firmware are authentic. So we in the beginning we talked about integrity, right? So integrity, where you ensure that the data or the image you have downloaded is the authentic one. You can always ensure the check with the hash functions. So ensure that the image before you install into a router, you ensure that this is the authentic or it is error free. Okay. And then we need to restrict ICMP from untrusted interface, especially the interface facing internet. So we should not enable any ICMP. So the moment you enable ICMP, because any scanning network, scanning happens in the network, first thing what they do is do ICMP. So ping request, right? So it's always better to block ICMP in the internet facing directions. And wireless network security, if you use wireless, so we should always use encryption. There are encryption protocols which are shown here, like WEP, WPA, WPA2, right? So what are the things you need to ensure that you always use the longer encryption keys, so better security. And not only that, periodically you need to change the keys, right? And if you're using any public Wi-Fi, suppose let's say from your public Wi-Fi network, you're connecting your corporate network, or for that matter, if you're using some critical transactions, right? So always better to have a VPN, so that the network traffics are encrypted, so no one can in the middle can actually see through your traffics. And best practices for the WLAN, right? So change the router default username password, right? So whatever the password you have it when you buy a router, right? Or it could be a corporate router, or it could be your home router. So you need to ensure that the default passwords are changed. So even though nowadays the passwords are random from the factory itself, right? So they give the random SSID random password, but it's always better to put it customized, because those details will be always available at the OEM, right? So you need to put a custom username, custom password, right? So it should be secure. And then change the IP address subnet possible, right? So they might always 192.168 kind of thing. So the issue is the people try to push the packets with that IP address. Like, I told you that layer 2 network is a broadcast in nature, right? So that's where you need to change the IP segment. It would be give you additional level of security. And when you use SSID, if you want to be secure, so what you can do is you can just simply hide the broadcasting, right? When you go to any place, when you try to switch on your Wi-Fi, so you can see what are the networks available in that particular area, right? So if you wanted to be make it secure, what you can do is you can hide that SSID. So only you know what is the SSID. So you can go to your device, manually configure network, you know the SSID, and then you configure it. It actually connects only your device, but the other person, when it comes, he cannot see the SSID, which will not be visibly available. And you can actually restrict the MAC address, right? So MAC address restriction is it's not very secure, but it gives you additional level of security, because MAC spoofing is very much possible. So in that way, it's not complete secure, complete. You cannot think that once you have the MAC restriction, it's like completely secure. No, but as long as your MAC address are not known by the other person or the someone intruder, it's fine. So as soon as your MAC address came to know, someone can easily do the MAC spoofing. And then use the encryption. So as I told you, don't try to keep it open network. So whenever in the public network also, sometimes it is open network might be there, and in that case you should use VPN kind of a connection. And it's always that use longer complex key passphrases to ensure that. Okay, so and then when it comes to protocols, so we already discussed some of the things. So you should use always the secure network protocols, especially SSH over Telnet. So you should ensure that all your devices in the LAN are not having Telnet, right? So if at all any device does not support SSH, it's okay, but still using Telnet to connect remote session is not at all recommended, right? Because the Telnet, the password goes in a plain text. Or sometimes what happen, you might be using the same password in other device. So one password is compromised, all other devices also compromised. So you need to ensure that you never use Telnet in your network, right? And then whenever you use application layer protocol, you need to ensure that you always use the protocols which are supports transport layer security, right? So especially even the network devices nowadays management through web interface. So you need to ensure that the web interface is HTTP. Yes, okay. So it should be HTTPS, right? Whenever you use any secure application. So when you use only HTTP, the password can be easily sniffed by someone, right? And then use SFTP instead of using FTP. But some cases are FTP is okay. For example, if you want to use anonymous file transfer. So let's say you have the data, some data are published in the common area where anyone can download, right? So that kind of information, always you can use FTP. But if you want to securely transfer, so it's always recommended use to SFTP kind of a protocol. And in network layer, we want to secure, so you can use always IPsec to ensure that the devices, network devices, when they talk to each other, though they understand, authenticate they're actually talking to the right device. Okay. And when it comes to audit, so periodic network audit, right? It's not only that whatever you designed is enough, but you need to ensure periodically what are the things put in place. Is it enough, adequate, or it is needed some more, things, right? So it should do periodic update, like network vulnerabilities. Is there any vulnerabilities in my network, right? Or you have to check unused or unnecessary applications are running in my network, right? It's like DSCP service, or someone is running some DNS service or mail service. So you need to check there is NMS will be available. So you can configure NMS saying that find out is there any systems running unnecessary applications, and you can see what are the ports are open, unnecessary ports are open in a network. You can just find out, and if it's open, you can just try to close those things. And whether antivirus, anti-malware, malicious traffics are available in the network. So you can just observe these things by doing just a network audit, right? And then you can do regular assessment like VAPT, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing for the servers which are facing towards internet, especially facing towards internet. That is the most vulnerable point of penetration, right? Because that is exposed to internet. So we need to, so certain guidelines says every 6 months you should have a VAPT assessment done for your servers. So you should follow that, and then you see is there any vulnerabilities. We try to patch it up with updates or whatever means. Okay. And then you should have monitoring centralized logging. So you should have centralized log, and you should also audit the logs, right? So what is happening, whether logs are proper or logs are properly logging, or is there is any lag, or in the log analyzer, using the log analyzer also, you can actually see the patterns. Is there any anomalies or any vulnerabilities that can also give you some kind of glimpse of ideas. And then you should have a continuous monitoring. It's not only you periodically do once in a 6 month do audit and then try to find the issues. That's not sufficient, right? So it could happen. So once you do the audit, so within a month you might have some vulnerabilities coming up, and then you never know, right? So that's where you need to have a continuous monitoring. So when you have a continuous monitoring, you know what are the things happening in and around the network, right? So first thing, you should know what is your network. So for example, you should have proper diagram and audit requirements and documents. What are the logs, where it's stored, which are the servers, right? And what are the policies? All those things you should have a proper documentation. And you should have IP traffic monitoring to know the advance about the bombs, botnet, DOS, and any anomalies found in the network. Any pattern is changed, right? When you see the traffic monitoring every day, so you can just every day once in a while just open and see is there is traffics are any having any different from the normal pattern, right? And then you can say have analysis of 24/7. So you can have the tools which can actually analyze the traffics. You can have you can actually check with the firewall also. That would give you only the perimeter level, but it's better to have the logs in entire network. Like you can have a monitoring ports done, or you can configure a flow, right? So S-flow kind of thing, you can configure it where the S-flow servers will have complete visibility of a network. Okay. And incident management. So how do you manage the incident? Suppose let's say there is a security incident or any failure incident happen in your network, right? How can you handle this? So you can have a system called security information event management system. So that system will actually have the automated things where any security incident happen, it can easily escalate and record and things like that, right? Or you can have a security operations center. You can configure security SOC kind of environment where it could actually tell you the any possible incidents happening in the network, right? By through the understanding the network pattern using some agents installed onto the devices. An incident response team responsible to escalating the incident to the appropriate team. So once the incident happening, so it has to escalate to the appropriate team. So if it is a firewall incident or it's a network incident, it could be a server incident, right? So the consent team has to look through it and then find out what is the issue, right? How to fix it. All those things has to be finalized. So necessary changes and update security policies. It's not only that fixing those issues, and also you need to ensure what is the long term or what is the root cause. So we need to identify what is the root cause. So once you know the root cause, and then you can try to fix it in a long term. How can you fix it in a long term? You can change your policy. Suppose some changes required in the policy due to let could be password policy. So there is this incident could have been due to weak password. So then we need to update the password policy, right? Or the password policy implementation problem. So what are the implementation guidelines, right? So those things we need to see. And then if possibly framework also to be adapted. So what are the changes we need to adapt in the framework? Is there any flaws or any missing in the framework itself? So we need to ensure and then improve that entire policy and framework to secure the network infrastructure. And finally, it's not only that, and then all the staffs and users, right, should aware of the security requirement, and then security requirement of an organization, policy and standards, right? So every employee must undergo the training periodically, maybe 6 months once, because every 6 months people might forget, or every 6 months the technology also can upgrade, or the people also comes and goes. So that's the reason we should have regular training conducted for the user and staffs, right? Consider that this often emerges from the negligence of employee. So if employees not aware of the security issues, so the simple negligence could lead into a big problems, right? And so the employees, the easiest targets attackers social engineering techniques. So phishing email, someone sending you the phishing email saying that your email account is expired, please click this link to update your informations, right? So those kind of phishing attacks, phishing mails could be sent to users, and then by mistake one user compromised this identity. So using that identity, attacker can land onto a network, and once he comes to network, it's the things can go even worse, right? So it is important to provide employee with the necessary training to upgrade and cultivate their skills continuously. So it's not only the users, the employees who manages the network, who manages the infrastructure, should be given an adequate or right training to understand the requirement of an organization, to ensure that they're into the right place to manage the right thing. So I think with this, I have come to the end of the session. So if at all any questions, I can take it. So otherwise, thanks for the opportunity once again. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So
Yes, participants, if you have any questions, any doubts, please free to ask. Also, you can put it in chat box.
yeah, once again, let me check this chat box. Yeah, I don't see any questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. We have given insight information about the network security and the policies we need to follow.
Yeah.
Network. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. So I hope it's useful. I will
Yes,
see you
sir.
next time.
It was
Yeah.
very
Thank you.
useful.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Dear participants, you can wait for the feedback link as well as the final quiz. So you will be posting in both the WhatsApp group as well as in the chat box. So please do wait for a few minutes. So we'll come back with the quiz as well as the feedback link. Again, one more request, if you're not attend any quiz from the session 1, from the day 1, you can take up those quizzes also.